Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Conversation. I am your sometimes host, Francesca Fiorentini. I hope you're doing very, very well. I'm really excited for today's show. We've got two awesome guests. My first guest is a Democratic strategist, former vice president of GLAAD, LGBTQ rights leader, founder of ZS Strategies, because his name is Zeke Stokes. Zeke, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
Yeah, so this has been a really interesting moment for LGBTQ rights. Obviously, now with a Democratic president in the White House, reversing some of the awful slash and burn policies of the Trump administration, but also in a couple of ways with new representatives, specifically Marjorie Taylor Greene, essentially trolling the daughter of Representative Marie Newman, and having like sign wars outside of their offices. You have Senator Rand Paul grilling a nominee of the Biden administration, the Assistant Secretary of Health, who is trans, saying things like genital mutilation and just kind of going off on them. And then you have the Equality Act, right? So this expansion of the Civil Rights Act, preventing discrimination based on sexuality and gender identity, all of this together, where do you feel like we're at when it comes to this movement, when it comes to expanding rights for the LGBTQ community, given everything that's going on?
I know all in the span of 8 or 10 days, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it was a great day for the Equality Act to once again pass the U.S. House of Representatives under the leadership of Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats in charge there. It passed back in 2019, but of course we still had Mitch McConnell in charge of the U.S. Senate, who would not allow it to come up for a vote. The Equality Act would essentially provide explicit and consistent non-discrimination protections across the country in areas like employment, housing, jury service, public services and accommodations, all of those types of things. Because what we have right now really is a patchwork of protection. So, I may be protected when I try to go rent an apartment in New York City, but if I go across state lines to some other state, I may not be protected, and that may be through no fault of my own. I may get transferred by my job, and suddenly I'm not protected. So we need those protections to be explicit across the country. Now, the good news is that 90% of Americans believe that LGBTQ people should be treated fairly under the law, and in fact, more than 70% support the explicit protections that the Equality Act provides. And that's not just Democrats and independents. More than 70% of Republicans also support that. So what we're looking at right now, as it relates to the Equality Act, is a vote that's going to hopefully take place in the Senate sooner rather than later, with Majority Leader Schumer saying that he will bring it to the floor for a vote. But unfortunately, we've got this nasty thing called the filibuster in the way. So we're going to need to get to 60 votes on this over in the Senate. And it's going to be very tough because Republicans in the Senate really aren't listening to what Americans are saying as it relates to this Equality Act.
Yeah. I know one of the sticking points for Republicans somehow, and this has sort of been, as Christian nationalism essentially has crept into government and into the Republican Party. One of the things they're using kind of as a cudgel is this idea of religious liberty, that county clerks or bakers, don't have to, basically places of employment don't have to provide the equal protections or serve LGBTQ people equally. And some of senators are on board with that notion. What would this act do to that religious liberty, all those religious liberty sort of, I believe it, there's like an amendment or an act that like the Trump administration basically warped in the favor of essentially people who want to discriminate against gay people. What would this act mean for that?
So this act does nothing to compromise religious liberty in this country. It's embedded into our Constitution, and providing equal protections for LGBTQ people does nothing to change that. But there is a group of people led mostly by Republicans who want to insert these amendments that would somehow create these carve-outs so that all I have to say to discriminate against someone is that it's a part of my deeply held religious beliefs. And it goes so much deeper than serving my husband and me a piece of cake or sitting down in a restaurant. What if I'm in a small rural town and I need to take my child to the emergency room and it's the only emergency room in town? and it's the middle of the night, and the doctor says, no, it's against my my deeply held religious beliefs to serve your kid because you're same-sex parents. That's the kind of danger that LGBTQ people are in across this country. And that's why we need this Equality Act. These so-called religious liberty carve-outs, religious exemptions, they're really nothing more than a license to discriminate by people who want to discriminate in the first place. And it also assumes that LGBTQ people can't also be religious people. There are many, many LGBTQ people of faith, and so they like to raise this sort of fake issue of God versus gay, but it's not that. It's really just a question of whether or not we should be treating all of God's children, if you believe that way, the same under the law.
Amen. You brought up God.
Absolutely.
Amen. I believe in that. I think it's so interesting though that, and I guess wondering your thoughts on this, that especially when it comes to trans rights, it just seems like the right has used like transgender people and transgender Americans as just like their final culture war battle. I mean, again, with Representative Marie Newman and then with Rand Paul, just like that disgusting display. Like, why do you feel like they're still using, attacks on the LGBTQ community in their court? And like, what is it gonna take to finally dismantle that?
The right wing that honestly controls the Republican Party right now, they can't win elections without attacking some marginalized community. We saw it with Donald Trump over the last 4 years, whether it's women or people of color or immigrants or Muslims or people with disabilities. They've sort of been through the whole list, and every few years they pick a new community to target. At one point it was gay people. We were going to have a federal marriage amendment to stop gay people from getting married, and then when the tide turned among Americans on that, they moved on to the next thing. The truth of the matter is, when it comes to trans people, only about 20% of people in this country say they know someone personally who is trans. And so we have a lot of education to do among the American public about what it means to be trans. When you juxtapose that to folks who say they know someone who is openly gay or lesbian, that number is 80% plus. And when you know someone personally, that's what changes public opinion. And so they're depending on this lack of education, this lack of familiarity to demonize trans people. But trans people are in our lives every day, whether you know it or not. They're here to stay. And in fact, these attacks that were launched by Rand Paul and Marjorie Taylor Greene and others this week are based in misinformation and lies and myths about what it means to be trans, and really not in the medical science of that has been established for many years about how to treat trans people and what it means to be transgender in this country. So it's unfortunate, but I think the tide will eventually turn and they'll move on to some other community to villainize. But in the meantime, people's lives are at risk when you have this kind of rhetoric in the public space. We saw it on display January 6th, and this is just a microcosm of that. When you raise this type of rhetoric, it puts people's lives in danger, and it has to stop.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on whether this will pass the Senate or not? Do you think that there could be 10 Republicans on board, or do you think it has to basically, are we gonna have to abolish a filibuster to have such a basic protection for so many Americans?
Well, I think we need to abolish the filibuster regardless. It's standing in the way of so many things. I'm hopeful that we can get to 60 in the Senate. It's going to be very tough, I will say, and I think there will be efforts to sort of water this down and create these religious carve-outs. And I'm hopeful that the Democrats in the majority and fair-minded Republicans who are looking at this and claim they care about LGBTQ people will resist those efforts and will allow this to move forward and provide the kinds of protections that LGBTQ people need in this country. We provide those protections for race and disability and gender and lots of other things, but LGBTQ people are not explicitly protected, and most Americans actually think we are, and the fact is we're not.
Yeah. One last question. I thought that the Supreme Court, I was reading about this, that the Supreme Court ruled that gender identity and sexual orientation, those are protected when it comes to anti-discrimination laws. And yet we still need this extra layer. Can you talk about that, or how does that interplay?
Sure. There was a ruling at the Supreme Court last year, actually, in the Bostock case, that ruled that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act should be interpreted, sex discrimination should be interpreted to mean sexual orientation and gender identity. And of course, the new Biden administration has now directed federal agencies to interpret that even further. But what we need now is not to depend on the interpretation of the Supreme Court or a friendly administration. We need to codify it into law, and that's what the Equality Act would do.
Absolutely. Zeke Stokes, thank you so much for breaking this down for us. It's something we have to continue to fight for and follow. And oh my gosh, it's the year 2021. Let's do it.
Let's move on, right? Thank you so much for talking about it and educating your viewers.
Of course. Thank you. And be well.
You too.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.